Welcome to Cognitive Liberty. I'm your host, Clyde Lewis. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm Clyde Lewis, and welcome once again to Cognitive Liberty on the Liberty Beacon TV network. On today's show, I have with me Thomas Sheridan from Ireland, who is here to talk with us about some of the things that have been on my mind. And we were having a discussion early before we started this about what the world is going through right now. And I have said many times on Ground Zero and when I spoke in Las Vegas that what we have happening right now is something what I like to call a trauma paradigm. Many people talk about different paradigms, and they're all healing paradigms and times for healing and things of this nature. But I really don't think we're healing. I think we're basically giving into our trauma, and it does interfere with our cognitive liberty and our ability to function. And I guess, Thomas, the first question out of me today is that, do you sense that we're in a trauma paradigm right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is self-inflicted. I think a lot of it is self-inflicted. I think people are actually making their lives much more difficult than they should be. But it's also the top is feeding down on it, so they're loving it as well. But there's definitely an element where people are not responding correctly to exterior factors they can't control. I see that in things like, you see a lot of Americans people around the world, they're upset about Trump. Well, if their trauma, this self-induced trauma, is actually going to change the situation. It's actually going to, make things happen. And the same in England, I see with this Brexit thing. There's an element of you have to somehow be constantly upset about it, or you're not normal. There's almost like a sense of normality in this trauma. It's not like the trauma of a mother giving birth where something good is going to come out at the end of it. It's the trauma for the sake of the trauma itself. And I think it's the control system absolutely loves it. They see it as a kind of a mechanism by which to regulate the society to get what they want from them. So absolutely, I totally believe that.
Yeah, I've been seeing not only do we find ourselves in the middle of this trauma paradigm, but how it affects people, I think, is very telling in the fact that I've said before that now here in America, and obviously what you're talking about in Ireland and Brexit, we're living in times where if you don't feel like a victim, you're not normal. The idea of normalizing victimhood and saying that you need therapy, you need this, you need to join people who feel the same way you do about certain political agendas. And the thing is, what this does is it completely turns the ideological dialogue into something of we have problems, you have problems, I have problems. Somebody is always there to get us out of our problems, or at least there to tell us we have them every day, like the mainstream media and other like television and media.
It's also almost like a form of benediction as well. Oh, a certain person has this lifestyle. Maybe they're they're transgender, they're pretending to be transgender, they're pretending to be this or that or the other. Maybe they really are, maybe they're not. Maybe they do have a certain lifestyle thing, but it's not that they care about the actual lifestyle thing. They want a kind of attention for it. Oh, look at me, I'm a member of a minority, I'm a member of this group, I'm in pain. And it's almost like it's generated out of a kind of a first world problem. It's people who don't actually, if you have no problems in your life, you come from a comfortable family, a comfortable background, a stable environment in a country that has no wars or anything or economic problems, what do? You will invent them. You will invent problems, and you will use them as a kind of a social cachet in order to virtue signal, but also that sanctimony is almost, it plays into the idea of a class system. If you do not feel sorry for me because of my plight, therefore you're a bigot, therefore I'm being oppressed. And this is a very dangerous mechanism. I think a lot of this comes out of things like clinical psychology, where everyone, like you said, is diagnosed with a problem. And that condition is almost like a self-hex, and it becomes a thing where they thrive on pity. So it's like it's trauma without, resolution in terms of achieving this trauma, the harvesting of pity from others.
Yeah, I was thinking about also the fact that we have a number of people too. Like, for example, we have this divisiveness between races here in the United States. And the divisiveness comes, I believe, from a group of individuals that mostly white individuals who decide that they want to take on a cause, and the cause is looking upon blacks with not disdain, but with pity. And so therefore they decide to put themselves in a position of saying, well, I'm for racial diversity, and I'm for this, and I'm for that, and I'm here to help. But most of these people, these white, uptight, liberal individuals, I call them, they don't even want to walk into a neighborhood where these problems are. I mean, they can sit in their little, rooms with their hashtags and their activism or hacktivism on the internet. But when it comes time to actually get down and get into the neighborhoods where these problems are and try to solve the problems, they're nowhere to be found.
Yeah, I lived in the US for years, so I know exactly what it's like. The Upper East Side of Manhattan or the Hamptons, you'd have like the most hardcore, almost like a socialist mindset, very sort of like pontificating towards and condescending, I might add, and patronizing towards black people and African Americans, as if somehow they needed their help, needed their glorious benevolence bequeathed upon them from the sanctity of their ivory tower. It's just another form of racism when you think about it. They treat these people like there's something wrong with them and they need help. They can't accept them as individuals who can make their own lives and do their own things. We have the same problem in Europe with Muslims. You have like wealthy people, wealthy Europeans who tell everybody to say, like, oh, the poor European Muslims, blah, 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 blah. But yet they're the same people who have empathy for someone who may be, say, not Muslim and living close to, say, a large Muslim area and having to deal with, maybe knockoffs of a different kind of racism, or actually even sort of like a cultural overtaking, this kind of, or well, in this case, it's a religious overtaking, and things like shops not selling certain products and things like that because they might offend and their civil rights or their ability, their desire to live in a modern Western democracy is compromised by these people saying, oh, let's respect this. Let's, give in to the minority, give into this kind of thing. Now, I think there's a sinister aspect to that as well. I think that's also a kind of they're trying to generate trouble between both sides because they know that in their ivory towers, they're always going to be safe. So if they can actually cause conflicts between, say, working class, whites in America and African Americans, or working class whites in Europe, or Native European and Muslim immigrants, that suits them fine because, as you said, the trauma culture continues to flourish and go stronger, and it only allows these parasites at the top, these ultra liberal parasites, to pontificate and to suck and feed off it like vampires at an even greater level to this kind of thing. And this is a very, very dangerous, look what happened in the Balkans. It's a very, very dangerous game to go down this way because ultimately it'll be the same old story. You will have decent people on both sides who'll be attacking each other while you have these sort of like these glorious beings of light and virtue at the top, these paragons of decency, acting like, oh, is it a terrible thing when ultimately they fed it.
I've been talking about vampires a lot on my other show, and there are a number of people who are irritated at the fact that I use the term vampire. You just use the term vampire as well. And I was the reason why I don't feel bad about using the term vampire is because if you go to the old grimoires written by the sages and by the friars and by all of these alchemists of the 16th century, they'll tell you the vampires are real. They'll tell you that there are men among us who are basically without any morals whatsoever, and they will kill, eat, drink the blood of innocent people. And so when I saw the irritation come up saying, well, most talk show hosts talk about real things. Here you are talking about vampires, which are not real things. And so I figured, well, okay, let me just word it for people who don't understand what a vampire is. A vampire is a super predator. And human beings can become super predators if they don't care and they have no morals. And I think that that's one of the reasons. I mean, if I have to use newspeak to describe a vampire, I mean, Hollywood's done its best to make us think that vampires just rise from the dead and suck the blood and become misunderstood pariahs and end up going home with the girl. Yeah, that happens a lot in movies. But the reality is that we do have super predators among us that don't care about innocence, that don't care about anything else but to continue to bring pain to a group of people. And in the process, I've noticed too that now with the quote opioid epidemic, they've made your pain political as well as to how you get rid of pain, whether it be to take opioids, smoke marijuana, or something else. And I think that that's significant of the vampire culture we live in.
Yeah, well, the vampire is a superb analogy for the psychopath. In fact, the ultimate vampire novel, Dracula, written by Bram Stoker, his real life job was he was a theatrical agent for a very famous Victorian actor at the time called Henry Irving, and the character of Count Dracula in that book is based on Henry Irving. Now, Henry Irving was an enormous manipulator of people. He was an incredible womanizer and user of people, and Bram Stoker was not only exploited by this guy Irving, who played on him, brought him into his life as his agent, but also exploited him completely. But at the same time too, Stoker also saw Irving using women, excuse me, disposing of them, just using them as objects, and using people and having no regard for anyone's feelings or anyone's other life. The vampire that he was based it on only saw other people as a source of energy that he could extract from them and then discard them. And you're right. There's a huge vampire culture. This kind of imposing trauma on us. They feed.
I'm not talking about the subculture. I mean, there's a subculture of what I call Victorian fashion victims that basically paint their faces white in their goth groups. Look, when I was in high school, I thought that maybe at one time I was a goth person. I listened to Bauhaus. I was an avid listener of Bauhaus and other bands that most certainly would be considered devilish, if you will. But today, it's more than that. It's the super predatory nature of this small group of people that make the rules and break the rules and act on impunity rather than trying to help the situation. They go out and they abuse people. I don't think it's any real surprise that we're seeing now the light being cast on some of these manipulators, these abusers, sexual abusers, predators. And I have a feeling that the next phase will be the revelation of the pedophile rings that exist in the United States. I know that England went through their situation with Savile and the royal families and the relationships he had. I mean, what did that do to England? Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, the Jimmy Savile thing is an enormous denial thing. Savile is beyond comprehension in how, in terms of what he got up to. We're not only talking about someone who's a pedophile, and also a sex predator as well on women and stuff like that. But also he was confirmed. We can confirm this. He was absolutely a necrophiliac. He used to go to Leeds General Hospital, bribe the staff there with drink and money, and then they used to get cadavers out of the morgue, and he would have sex with the best looking cadavers. He would take glass eyeballs out of the cadavers and have rings and jewelry made with the glass eyeballs, and then go on TV doing music shows and kids shows wearing these, he got away with it because he was a zany guy, but he was a monster in every sense of the word, and in a pure kind of Brothers Grimm manner of speaking. He was a monster. And Countess Bathroy, that's the kind of league he was operating in. His connections to not only the British royal family, but many European governments was quite frighteningly close. He was almost certainly, during the time of what we call the Troubles here in Ireland, when the IRA and the whole thing with the Ireland and Britain thing was going on, in the 70s, a courier between the two governments, because he was a perfect cover, a celebrity going on charity work. But this allowed him to do certain things and get away with it, and he knew this kind of thing. And he's heavily involved with serial killers. We know for a fact he was best friends with the notorious Yorkshire Ripper, who killed nearly 20 women in the north of England in the 70s and early 80s. Constantly visited him at Broadmoor Psychiatric Prison. He was also, which now been confirmed after, and I was the one who said it years ago, that he was connected to a specific group of child murderers called the Moors Murderers, Moira Hindley and Ian Brady, who died recently in prison. Now, this guy was beyond sinister. He was so dark and so sinister, it's almost impossible to believe that he actually existed. Coupled with his connections to royalty, his connections to senior government, and to this kind of thing. He was very close friends with a woman called Lady Goulding, who was actually she had the highest security clearance in World War II. She was the diplomatic attaché between Winston Churchill and the King, and her father was also the ambassador to the Third Reich right before the war happened. So that the circles that he moved in were astoundingly powerful, and yet they did know, but they turned a blind eye to it because he was also a political tool. As I said, they were using him as a courier as well. This is a very good way of moving information because during the troubles in Northern Ireland, the IRA had intercepted every single British military form of communication, radio, you name it, they had intercepted it all. They couldn't do anything, the British military. So what they were doing was getting Jimmy Savile. If he was bringing information to the Irish government, they'd give him a file. He'd come over to Ireland on a charity event, like a running. They used to do a lot of running events and raise money for charity. And then he would have the file in his pocket. This kind of thing. They use celebrities for a lot. Matt Hari, this thing always goes on. This always went on. And he got away with it because of his security clearance and because of association with the royals. He's probably at least involved in one murder and maybe two. There's very good evidence that he's involved in two murders. One of a prostitute in England with Peter Sutcliffe and the other of a young girl in Yorkshire. Now, he died in his bed, surrounded by his money, with his knighthood intact. Now, you asked me about what the effects of that was. They went on a witch hunt against other people for much lesser crimes in order to placate the bloodlust of the public. And one of these people they went for was a character called Rolf Harris. He was an Australian guy who was a very famous children's presenter in Britain. He was not a paedophile, but they tried to drum up everything against him. He behaved inappropriately around women a few times. He had a few affairs, but nothing illegal, nothing outrageous. He wasn't a rapist. He wasn't a serial womanizer. He had a few indiscretions, should we say, that a lot of people in the music industry, they all have it. A lot of people and celebrities have this. You get the lower level of this kind of thing, but he was probably next to Jimmy Savile, the most loved character, and they sacrificed him in order to make people forget about Savile. And that's how dangerous these people are. Like when I see Kevin Spacey coming, we've known about him for years. But at some point, watch out. They'll probably sacrifice someone in Hollywood who isn't too bad, maybe just a harmless drug addict womanizer. And they will sacrifice him as public enemy number one to protect the real monsters.
So that's the thing. That's the question: is who are the real monsters? I mean, Harvey Weinstein has been, raked over the coals as being a womanizer. And of course, all these women coming forward and saying he was a part of it. And this turns into a very ugly argument. The anti-Semites are coming out of the woodwork saying, the manipulative Jews are at it again, and all this other ugly stuff that goes on. But then we get to Kevin Spacey, and we also Dustin Hoffman now is on is the target now from someone else. I'm sure Ben Affleck, if he hasn't already, is going to get a lot of crap. It's because of the association process. It's like the 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon. Somebody knew somebody or has been involved with somebody who has acted inappropriately at a Hollywood party. And then Corey Feldman is ready to come forward saying that he's going to name names in the pedophile scandals of Hollywood. We've been through this before. We actually here on my show, we did a show about Pedogate. We called it Pedogate, and it was after that, 3 shows after that, that it came that a number of other so-called conspiracy theorists came forward with something called Pizzagate, and the Podestas were then drawn into the mix, and so was Abramovic and her secret little gatherings, spirit cooking, and things of that nature. And I think that even if the media did not stick with that and stay with that, which they did not, it does paint a picture of some dark, very traumatic things going on behind the scenes in Hollywood and in Washington. And I worry that that it'll most certainly be so outrageous that people won't believe it, and they'll basically ignore it like they did with Jimmy Savile.
Well, the world that we live in is very different than the world that they live in. It's almost like they live in a kind of in a whole different culture and a whole different lifestyle that we're not privy to, and occasionally it breaks the surface. Now, the thing with Weinstein is they were all adult women that he was with, and anyone who's unless you're exceptionally naive, everyone knows about the Hollywood casting couch. It has this reputation going back decades. And there's elements of that there that are being fed out as being the greatest horror there ever was. The thing is that no one's talking about pedophilia, even with the stuff going around with Kevin Spacey. And I remember one of the main reasons that's all come out is because he was notoriously in a notorious name for doing that in England while he worked in the theatre and in films over there. So they couldn't really hide him as easily. But what they're doing is it's the same thing again. They're hiding the worst crime of all, the exploitation of children. And then they're gaslighting people to think that somehow these attractive adult, consenting adult females who probably were offered the casting couch and took that opportunity, that's somehow a much more horrific thing than getting a child and just raping them, using them, discarding them. Now, we know what happened in England about 5 or 6 years ago. It was confirmed, and then it died a death, that the police investigated and discovered that a 14-year-old boy had been murdered at an S&M party, which British politicians were at, and then it died a death, and then suddenly all these sex scandals involving men and women, heterosexual sex scandals came out. Weinstein's function, I believe, is the same as that as Rolf Harris in England. He's there his persecution, or whatever you want to call it, is to hide something much darker and much more disturbing, and something, look, Clyde, I'll be honest with you. I don't even believe that these people are just even pedophiles. I think they're actually sex killers. I think they will kill children as part of it. Their depravity, it has no limits, because like any kind of highly perverted individual, nothing is enough. They'll always seek the next thing and the next thing and the next adrenaline rush. And these people, because they're massively egoed, a lot of them are cocaine and other kinds of drug addicts. They're fired up. They're going to the next thrill, and the next thrill will be things like, necrophilia, sex killings and sex murders with children. I'm sorry, but what came out with the Podesta pizza thing? At the time, people were saying, oh, it's nonsense, all these strange code words for pizza flavors and pizza toppings and this kind of thing. Well, last week, a police officer was prosecuted for pedophilia in New Jersey, and he was using those terms surrounding pizza.
Cheese pizza.
So it's a fact.
They said that cheese pizza is code for little boy.
Yeah.
I read that article, and I was like, oh, wow. I said, even though Pizzagate was basically something that was created in order to expose some of the things going on, the execution of Pizzagate, or the execution of the investigation of it all, I thought was flawed. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't touch it. But I did put it all together in one big thing, not just the pizza parlor where it allegedly was going down. But I was saying, if you want to go all the way back to the Franklin cover-up in Washington, back in the time of the Bush administration, and I guess when Reagan and Bush were making their decision, I don't think anybody's going to talk about that because it wasn't on the internet. And immediately you have all these conservatives here in the United States saying, well, this whole pedophile sexual abuse thing, it's a liberal thing. It only happens to liberals because liberals are godless. And you go back, you say, well, what about the Franklin cover-up? People, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're, you look about the White House where, roaming through the White House were child prostitutes. And not only that, but I mean, when you talk about killers roaming areas of the White House, John Wayne Gacy, the known pedophile clown killer, he would show up at parties and places with the Carters. He hung out with the Carters, Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter.
What? Those sex scandals around the White House at Reagan, they only came out, and we only really know about them because a British TV company called, I think it was Granada, or one of the Yorkshire TV, one of them had a program where they did you can actually find this online, a documentary about this Franklin cover up. And literally on the day it was being broadcast, Margaret Thatcher, using the Home Office and MI5, put a gagging order on the TV station and told them that the producers and the owners of the station would go to prison if that show was broadcast tonight. And that show was, and told them to destroy all the all the broadcast videotapes of it. And luckily someone saved some, and they're actually on the internet. You can see them. And you cannot believe what you're watching. Clear-cut evidence of rent boys being brought into the Reagan White House for sex parties. With at the time the Reagan-Bush administration was just only become in power, and you get this impression that the whole interior of the Republican Party is one big pederast, or at that time was one big pederast scene, while they're talking about family values and getting back to basics and this kind of thing. And Ronald Reagan and which is interesting, Clyde, because recently Ronald Reagan's son, Ronald Reagan Jr., came out with the most vitriolic attack on President Trump that was literally very much fear-based. And you do wonder if what's driving that fear. Is there some kind of terror of this all being the next thing to come out? It's almost like the JFK file that Trump released last week was a warning shot. Very much a warning
not only
shot.
that, but here's something that we need to understand, is that, and this is one of the things I think the country, I mean, in the back of my mind, I remember back when I was reading about Kevin Spacey, and I really like Kevin Spacey. I watch House of Cards. I'm a big fan of the movies that he's been in, from Seven to Usual Suspects. He always seems to turn an American Beauty. He's always seemed to turn a great performance. Well, I had known from some inside, and in fact, you look at Seth MacFarlane on Family Guy, he would actually expose people like Weinstein and Kevin Spacey with some jokes that are inside baseball on his cartoon Family Guy. And I knew all about this. And I also knew it from other animators and people that I have in the business that I knew. And there are other secrets too. But we get into this Lolita Express that most certainly is right there. It's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. It's Epstein's Island. People like the Clintons going there. Kevin Spacey, of course, went there. And now we get into the trepidatious idea, or at least the report, that maybe even Donald Trump went there. And this is what I'm worried about. I'm worried that that's the next step, is that, while they're doing Russian collusion, which has no proof whatsoever, they may have proof of Donald Trump maybe being involved in the Epstein situation. Not that he would be a pedophile, but the idea that he is involved with, since he's rich and everything, he's been involved with these types of sex parties. And this is what I think it's leading to. It's leading to the ultimate nail in the coffin, as it was for Bill Clinton. The idea that if we can't nail him with being insane, if we can't nail him with Russian collusion, we're certainly going to nail him where he has sex. And that's what the dossier was about. It was about him cavorting with Russian hookers, and they call it Pee-Pee Gate because, of course, they say that he wanted some kinky sex act done on him. And so these are the things that I worry about too. That the dossier, dirty politics is what's going on. With all of the monsters that are all basically, with all the vampires turning themselves in, or at least being exposed, it'll go down and go down and go down until it reaches the head dude. And I don't know who the head dude is, but there's got to be one in the middle of all of it that's causing this problem.
Yeah, that's why I have a standoffish kind of approach to these kind of things. I don't see the politicians as anything other than, so we say, jesters. I see Trump very much as a very useful kind of wrench in the works of the establishment, and I enjoy that very much. I see the potentials unleashed by that, but at the same time too, I'm wary of any politician in a position of power putting my faith in them. I see it's their echo and what they can achieve and what they can, disruption that they can cause is what I find the most interesting thing. That's the value of these people, not the actual politics or whatever like that. Having said that, I think I'd be very surprised if Trump was some kind of out and out extreme pervert involved in this Epstein's Island thing, because they'd unmasked him by now. they'd unmasked him by now. The Russian dossier has been shown to be utter nonsense and not true. And Trump is not smart. I'm sure he's had a very interesting life. He's enjoyed many, many women, I'm sure. I'm sure he's done things that, you know, that like he probably had a life similar to a rock star. But I don't think anyone that would cause him any problems unless it was things like children or young boys or something like that, or you know, true exploitation. He was beating a woman up or something like that while having sex with her. I think I wouldn't be worried about Trump. Now, why was he down on Epstein's Island? Who knows? Maybe there's all kinds of elements that things go on down there. Maybe
Well, it's like people are invited.
You know?
People are invited to the Bunny Ranch all the time. In fact, Dennis Hoff, of course, who runs the Bunny Ranch, I remember when I was in Reno, he got word that I was in town and he wanted to know if I could come over and visit. I came over and visited. I mean, it's like, you know, he and Flint were there, and of course, Hustler Magazine. And, you know, it's just something that, you know, curiosity is something that I had for it. Is like I wanted to know how it was run, well, you know, how we got away with it, because of course it's prostitution, but it's legal prostitution in the state of Nevada, and of course it's a party hangout. I mean, Howard Stern's people would go there. A lot of other, you know, stars would be there, basketball stars and other people. I remember when I was there, I ran into a few celebrities, and I was thinking, I guess this is the place to come and hang out if you want to, you know, you want to have a drink or two and maybe spend the night with a lady. But I didn't see anything wrong with exploring that. I mean, it's just that if there's depravity, I certainly don't want to be a part of depravity, although arguably people would say that prostitution is depravity. But I would say that, look, like you say, consenting adults doing things that are not illegal, and if that's the case, then I don't see a problem with it. I just think that right now, everything is so touchy. Everything is so trauma-based. It's all about victims and trauma, and it gets to a point where you're wondering, is there anybody out there that's normal? Is there anybody out there you can trust, especially in positions of power, especially people that you have, you know, like actors that you've really admired, like Kevin Spacey, or actors like Dustin Hoffman. Now, there's another one that people admire. Great actor, but now somebody's come forward and said that he basically touched her breasts, and she felt it was inappropriate. But, you know, that was like 17 years ago. And, and the other was 30 years ago. And I'm thinking, you know, that's a long time ago to hold in that you were offended by somebody's, you know, overtures. Now, I'm not excusing them, because, I mean, I've kept myself away from that kind of behavior for a reason, because I believe that it's morally right to do so. But, you know, what's going on is really an interesting phenomenon, I think, in our history. Especially, I think this is a way a lot of people have responded to trauma. And as you say, they're not getting to the real monsters. They're holding they're holding those and using those as the salvos they're firing before the big ones are revealed.
Yeah, and then the gaslighting continues, like, oh, Dustin Hoffman's the most evil man in the world because he grabbed a woman's boobs without asking. And meanwhile, you have like Meryl Streep, you know, constantly issuing salutations and benedictions towards a convicted pedophile, Roman Polanski. You know, this is the darkness of it. It's like these people don't seem to have the same boundaries and moralities as the rest of us. They don't seem to understand. Like they're so up their own backsides that they don't seem to understand that Roman Polanski, what he did is unforgivable. It's horrific. But they say, oh, he's a great film director, or he's a genius, but that doesn't excuse it. I often find that amazing that, you know, Mel Gibson went down for a long time because of basically he was wasted on alcohol, and he made a few mistakes in his personal life. He clearly had some kind of nervous breakdown. And because of the testimony that a cop said, he said something, you can never trust policemen. And also, I don't believe this idea that when someone is wildly drunk, the truth comes out. I'm actually more inclined to believe that an entity jumps in. That's another topic. But Mel Gibson looked like he was finished. He looked like he was completely gone. But yeah, he came back. He came back. Why? Because what he did in the eyes of the American people and the movie, going public was okay. It was bad behavior. Okay, but he's an alcoholic, and alcoholics sometimes do crazy and stupid and terrible things, but he didn't do anything spectacularly evil.
Right.
And that's, and that's the difference. And I think people like Dustin Hoffman could survive this. But again, they're gaslighting the public by saying touching a woman's breast is worse than being a pedophile. The Roman Polanski thing. And this is what we have to be wary of, because what they're doing is they're creating a new normal, a new kind of psychological social construct, which may have a bigger agenda than just Hollywood. It may be about it probably is about the acceptance and the legitimization of pederast and sex with children.
Well,
I think
I've also noticed that a lot of things that have been released lately have sort of a sexualizing effect on children. They like to sexualize children, and they take 12 or 13-year-olds. They make them look like they're older, and put them in situations that I would consider inappropriate. I remember when Dakota Fanning, she did a scene that was a rape scene, and they all helped her through it. And she was young at the time. It was some movie that was about going to see Elvis, and the scene was really inappropriate. She was raped by an older boy, and they were all like saying, "Well, we helped her through it." And it was a big, it helped her get to another phase in her career, just like when Miley Cyrus decided that she didn't want to be Hannah Montana anymore, so she went out on stage and humped a few stuffed animals and stuck her tongue out a lot, and that made her a woman. That made her now binary. She's no longer a male or a female. She says she's binary. And I'd say, why don't we just get back to normal again? But the sexualizing of her, we sexualize her to make sure that she sells more records. And it doesn't matter that her innocence is now taken, and we won't remember little Miley. We'll remember this version of Miley, riding on a wrecking ball naked, which is something that was really shocking to me because I couldn't believe it. But that just gets normalized. And, and you look at, what happened to, singers like Britney Spears. You see what's happening to singers like Katy Perry and others that went in all innocent and now coming out being a little bit more, it's not like they matured into a woman. It's like somehow somebody broke them into having this type of attitude. I remember reading about Kesha and how she said she was abused by Dr. Luke, who was her manager. And I remember videos of her, they did a whole video of her Die Young, the video Die Young, where they're having sex on altars in Christian churches. And throughout the entire video, you see inverted crosses and pentagrams. And I'm thinking, is this what she signed on for? And then obviously when she sued her manager and said, no, I didn't sign on for this abuse. I didn't sign on for the sexual abuse or the satanic abuse. Immediately the court said, well, you signed a contract. You're stuck with it.
Mm.
So
the shock value is a big part of the music business today, because there is no music business anymore. Nobody buys records, so it's very difficult for musicians and singers to get attention without shock value. And it's done to the extreme in order to get you people watching their video on YouTube, because that's where the record business is now, getting hits on YouTube and collecting money there. No one goes to the record store anymore and buys albums and singles. It doesn't happen anymore. So they have to generate this shock value in order to get you to watch YouTube or whatever the video platform is, so they can rack up the advertising points. And that's how they actually fund the music business these days. When we were growing up, you were talking about the goth days, Susie and the Banshees and bands like that. They put on that image almost like a role-playing thing. Of course, Susie wasn't a vampire. Peter Murphy from Bauhaus wasn't a vampire. They're actually quite normal people in real life. But like Black Sabbath and in the 70s, there was an element of role-playing. Even the Crazy World of Arthur Brown, if you go back further. It was a role-playing Alice Cooper. It was a role-playing persona that added to another dimension to the music, which was always very good. These were quality bands, quality records. These are people who could sing, write songs. They had quality. They knew what they were doing. Bowie, there you go, right? Mm-hmm. That's now gone the other way, where it's now the persona is the primary function, and the music is secondary to that. And that's what
I've always noticed that female singers. I've always noticed now that female singers are strippers first and singers second. I mean, if they don't,
they all look like.
What's that?
They all look like they're on the game. They all look like they're on the game.
Yeah, they all look like strippers. It's amazing. It's like, oh, okay, so you can move a pole and you can shake your butt this way and that way, but can you sing? And no, most of them can't. And that's the thing that's, certainly for me. Something I've noticed over the years. And then when it comes to it's always about image. It's always about what you look like, and it's always about what you can do to push that limit. And something like Justin Bieber, for example, I mean, it got to the point where he started talking about the Illuminati, and he started talking about all these other things that may or may not have been part of the music industry. But there is an Illuminati in a sense that there is a mob that requires certain types of actions, or you don't get airplay, or you don't get to be seen. And I think that's very unfortunate. But if you go back to the 70s, you'll know that there were certain factions that were working to do that sort of thing with other bands, and they were being committed. And some of them, you hear about some people like Tupac Shakur and others who were killed because they wouldn't comply with the wishes of these big money rappers or these artists that had record labels.
Graham Parsons, his death has never been fully explained. Found out in the desert and this kind of thing. A lot of strange things have gone down like that over the years. It's almost like I can believe they'd actually kill people in order to boost their record sales. They learned that from Buddy Holly on, that there's actually a value. I mean, look how the sales of John Lennon went through the roof. So that's like, it's a very dark and dangerous business. They will, this thing like the 27 Club and all this nonsense. There's an element of, literally, when you sign that contract for the record deal, you're literally potentially signing your life away. And if part of your marketing is for you to suddenly die, they'll do it. They'll do it. And there's ample evidence of this. Or else they'll let you die. If you have self-destructive behavior, they will encourage it. They will, in the hope that you do get killed. This kind of thing has gone on. It comes out these Dionysian cults out of Greece. That's actually quite an interesting aspect of paganism, is that the only type of paganism that these elites have actually held on to is the dark stuff, not the love of literature and poetry and the love of art and the love of philosophy, but things like pederasty from the symposiums in ancient Greece, where you'd have like the poet being pleasured by a young boy as he reads his latest sonnet. That's what they've held on to. They've held on to the Dionysian cults of the kind of like the human being who's more than a human being. He's a godlike creature, and he's followed around by humans in a state of ecstasy. So it's interesting that they have continued the worst aspects of paganism and not the best. And this is their role model. This is why I think they're moving towards this whole thing of legalizing pedophilia. They're making the pop stars younger and younger and younger, and they're dressed less and less. I saw a video, came out a few years ago now. It was a song by a girl called Jessie J, I think her name was. It's called Price Tag. She's literally, it's a catchy kind of pop song. It's not too bad. She's literally naked during the whole video, half naked. And while she's singing this song, the lyrics of the song are all about, I'm not materialistic. I'm not, I don't care about fame. And yet here you're being gaslighted by someone who's obviously begging for fame, begging for it. And you see this attitude over and over again. It's like, it's not, I hate to use the word morality because that comes so much from religion, like you said earlier on. But I say decency, decency, or what's appropriate. There's things you don't do around children, right? So, regardless of what your religious thing is at all, but these people are constantly trying to warp these boundaries, them.
And I've had a lot of people who I've talked with. Of course, I've been talking with a lot of members of, Masonic groups. I've been talking with people who have had more of a more balanced view of what we have here. And as like you're saying, I mean, they've embraced the Dionysian versions of paganism, which include perversions and what we call profanity and things that are considered chaotic and perverse. And we boiled it down to three factions. We have the ones who practice white magic, or they practice priesthood, which is supposed to be what is practiced in the major religions, is priesthood and white magic, and in the pagan sense, Wicca, white magic, witchcraft, that sort of thing. Then you have the darker path, the left-hand path, which is basically using that same magic, but using it for selfish reasons. So you have a selfless form of magic and a selfish form of magic. And then you go darker, and that is the more perverse form of magic, which is sexual magic, ritual magic, bloodletting magic, vampire magic, going down the list of all of the things, these darker realms. And then, of course, we lead it all to the satanic idea of what magic and ritualism is. And I think that if people learn that there are certain types of levels, and that the ones we most hear about are the ones that are the most profane and the most obviously sickening. And then we basically wrap all that into everybody, from witches to Wiccans to pagans to Druids to anybody who practices an earth religion, which I think is not good. I think it needs to be completely clear and on the level that what is being practiced by the more profane and the more perverse are the things that we don't accept in society, and that it's psychotic behavior, and it most certainly could be seen as satanic, but in reality, it's sick, it's depraved, and it's certainly something that it should not be accepted as human behavior. It finally becomes predatory behavior, super predator, or even vampirism, as I say. And so, no, don't snicker at vampirism, because vampires are very real and they're among us right now.
Yeah, that was a very erudite and very factual way you put it. People involved in the occult should be thought in the same way as Catholics, ordinary Catholics who go to Mass and bother no one. They shouldn't be blamed for the crimes of pedophile priests and bishops. We should see the occult as the same way. There are vast majority of people involved in the occult are not harming anyone. As you said, there's the left-hand path stuff. The left-hand path is generally the selfish magic. It's I'm going to get a girl, I'm going to get this girl, I'm going to get this money, I'm going to get this power at work. It's not that it's dark, but it's like Crowley was bang on when he said the ultimate objective of magic, what black magic is to move away from spiritual self-development. The vast majority of people, whether they're in Freemasonry, whether in Wicca, whether they're heathens or pagans, whether involved in basic ceremonial magic, are there for spiritual self-development. They're not interested in changing anyone. They just want a more interesting interaction with this five-sense reality and to discover the malleability of the material universe. That's the vast majority of people involved in the occult, and that includes most Freemasons. The secondary aspect is, like you said, the left-hand path. They're in it for greed, money, getting girls, but they're not malicious. They're just in it for themselves. And then the lowest level of that would be people who curse people. But then, like you said, it's like human nature or whatever drives this machine that we're driving around in. There are ones who take it to extreme levels, because black magic, and when I say black magic, I don't even like to use, we'll just say pathological magic is the term I use.
That's very good. Yeah.
Pathological magic, unfortunately, gives instant results, because it's the energetic charge is extremely powerful. Like, for instance, you walking down the street and you see a disabled person and you laugh at them and you call them a name, you instantly have an energetic harvesting from them. You've hurt them very deeply. They cannot defend themselves. Well, that would be a good analogy of the darkest kind of pathological magic. The idea of the instant power, the rush. You kill an animal and you seize its life energy. You murder someone. You rape someone. You molest a child, because you're attaining instant, powerful, energetic charges. This also includes the consumption of blood. Very important in a lot of this stuff, and things like the certain chemical attributes in blood providing highs. And it's another thing. There seems to be a lot of this nonsense starting up. When you say vampires, a lot of this blood drinking nonsense seems to be the sort of the gateway into that world. This thing where people drink other people's blood to get high or to get certain, the endocrine system, and all this kind of attitude from it is the gateway into that stuff, because it's feeding into this ultra pathological magic. The lowest of the low it achieves the most instantaneous, it's like results. It's a hands-on, there's no subtlety in it, there's no beauty in it, there's no elegance in it, there's no sense of connection with a higher purpose. It's almost like the piranhas or the viruses or the bacteria of the occult world.
I call it the virus mind. It's something that, in fact, and that was one of the original reasons for actually creating the mythology of a vampire, was the idea that it was a virus mind. The virus got into the host, and the virus had to spread, and the way it was spread is through the host attacking and drinking the blood of a person and then spreading the disease. It was like a dog with rabies biting somebody, and that person becomes rabid. I know that the same thing is utilized to give the metaphor of the zombie or the metaphor of the diseased individual. We have so many plagues now that are waiting at the doorstep, mostly plagues that we are familiar with from the 13th and 14th century, such as the Black Plague is now back in Madagascar, But one of the plagues that we're not addressing is the plague of the mind, or the robbing of the innocence, and the idea that the only way to survive in a world of monsters is become a predator yourself, which is something that I think is where we look through the glass darkly, where rather than trying to eliminate the monsters, we decide that we will become bigger monsters, and that and becoming bigger monsters means that we do everything because we've lost our ability to love, to live, and to care, and that's the hard part to understand.
The monster requires no initiation. The monster requires no work. It requires no self-development. You can become a monster very easy just by accepting it and becoming one. Where that's the appeal too, and that also comes out of this quick, fast, quick fix society we have. This idea that I need this now, I want this now. You know, like not only do I want the latest upgrade of a technological device like a mobile phone or a laptop or whatever, I want the latest upgrade of me. And you see, this is where this is an important thing for people like us in alternative media. Ultimately, it's going to somehow merge with transhumanism at some level. Transhumanism is going to be, transhumanism is just around the corner, but they have not found really a way to sell it to us. They've tried kind of silly and naff and twee ideas like, oh, you need a chip to get paid, or to buy a soda from a machine, or to get in the nightclub. Nonsense things to pay your toll. They're not appealing to people. They're going to bring transhumanism in a very depraved way with something like this. Now, they've already skirted around the margins with that by saying, if your child gets kidnapped, if you have a chip in the child, you'll be able to find them. See, that's already bringing in the trauma thing, because that almost like is a self-hexing thing. That like, oh, it's a given that my child will be kidnapped by a pedophile. I better get a chip. See, this is the dark magic. This is how dark magic works. They've imposed a scenario in your head that's already put you in a state of defense. They put a chip in your side. But I think it's going to have something to do with sex robots. I think this is the thing we've got to look at. This I've been watching this sex robot stuff for a while. The company called Real Doll. In fact, my book Puzzling People, which I wrote in 2010, I was talking about this Real Doll company, and I said you got to watch this because they're going to try and replace a human being with a doll, a sex doll. But it's only the sex part is stage one. That's just to get the base things. The next thing will be something to get you in there for some other reason. And I've been watching the development of this Real Doll and these other sex robot companies, and they get a lot of startup money, they get a lot of attention in the media, and the dolls are not only getting more realistic, but real girls are starting to wear makeup in such a way you cannot tell them from the sex doll. So the margin has already been blurred.
Well, think of virtual reality for one moment. Think of virtual reality. You're right on the money, and you're hitting the nail on the head, because look at virtual reality. If they are able to simulate sexual contact in a computer, then not only would we be having people who wish to have a sexual experience with the same sex, the opposite sex, but then comes the idea, are we going to give the pedophiles or those who seek after young people the opportunity to have sex with a virtual partner that appears young? And what does that do to the morals of the world? Because you can create a woman that's perfect for you in a virtual world. You can create the tension, you can create the feeling, you can create it all in a virtual world. But then when we get into the depravity, and we have these people who want to go to these virtual brothels, and what they do is, instead of asking for a woman program or a man program, whether homosexual or heterosexual, we then get into programs where we involve the innocents, or looking at children, and they may not even be based on real children. They may be just some computer creation, but still, it's the idea of where the mind is going. And that's why I call this show Cognitive Liberty, because it's beyond the realms of conspiracy. It's beyond the realms of everything. It's where the mind is going. It's where things happening to the mind are going to be so great in the future, because that's why they're going through it now. They want to find out what triggers the mind, what will trigger certain things to happen in human beings. And once they get to that point, your mind is just going to be ready for search, seizure, rape, whatever you want to talk about. It's going to happen and the people, the technocrats, are going to have your brain, and you're not going to not going to be able to find it.
At the height of the Soviet Union, they soon discovered that people, even in the communist system, had a spiritual need. They couldn't get away with it. They could not shut it off. So a movement started in the Soviet Union called cosmism. And the idea was that they would use, and this is true, I've actually got a film coming out tonight on my open source occult TV channel on YouTube, where they told the Russian people that we can put your dead members' families in a spaceship, symbolically, launch these spaceships into space, and you would upload their souls into, or their memory, they called it, they didn't use a word like soul, into what they called extra ecclesiastical activities. The idea was that you and everyone you loved and you lost, don't worry about praying to a god or seeing them in the next life. We will upload their memory to the stars and spaceships and on radio telescopes. It was the beginning of transhumanism. Now, those people are still the spiritual fathers of the present transhumanist scene in the world, the singularity and so on. I can see a situation where you're going to have, say, troops going off to fight in foreign wars, and they will actually, before the troop leaves, the soldier, the serviceman or woman leaves, they will build a robot that just looks like them, a replicant. And they will upload, not their souls, but they will upload as much as they can into the computer behind that. So if that person is killed in a real world, a real war, combat situation, the wife is consoled with this robot, this extra ecclesiastical activity of the robot of the husband. And then eventually, there's no blur, there's no lines between real human life and artificial human life. And this, I know your show is covering it, I know other shows are covering it, but I think this stuff is the one we've really got to highlight, because these, I won't of course on the station, but these monsters are so dark, and so this is where the occult, the dark end of the pathological occult is going to reach into the darkest aspects of transhumanism, and it will be nothing less than a mass sacrifice of the human race to replace it with a temporary technology thing that will ultimately be eventually degraded itself into a radio signal. It's the destruction of the material, literally the destruction of the human experience with the materialistic universe. And if there's no darker magic and no more pathological sorcery than that.
Well, and I just got through talking about the creation of the homunculus, or the activation of what would be pure Gollum into a transhumanist Pinocchio, which I think people need to understand is that, eventually all dolls become like Pinocchio. It just depends on what the creator wants you to do next. And that's the thing, is that we're merely flesh puppets wanting to become real robots, which I think is weird, because it used to be the other way around, where the robots, they craved to have flesh, and they wanted spirits, they wanted souls. And now we have it the other way around, where we have a group of people that have souls, and they have spirits, and they have flesh, they have blood, and they're willing to give up all of that to be immortal, in a sense, by having their memories, their ideas, and everything downloaded into an avatar that is not even a human avatar, and they live in a plastic or metal body for the rest of their eternity, which I think would be hell.
Yeah, biopsychological, technical marionettes suspended in a sea of sorcery. That's what they want. That's what they want. Entering into a dream as the robot. It's so dark. It's almost, it takes a lot to upset and make me scared. But I don't fear demons. I don't fear a devil. I don't fear werewolves. I don't fear anything like that. But my God, the potential of these pathological, powerful magi bringing that into normality. I think a lot of it is, as you said, it'll be brought through sex, dehumanization, through children. A child's sexual balance, say. Therefore, get a robot child. This kind of thing. Have a robot lover. This idea is very, very dark, and I think they're going to sell it as a kind of a salvation thing. Isn't humanity terrible? Aren't we destroying the planet? Aren't we horrible? Aren't we all racist? Aren't we all racist? Aren't we all Islamophobes? Aren't we all homophobes? Wouldn't it be better off if we could produce a version of us that all those things were erased like a virus on a program?
Exactly.
And that's it.
Thomas Sheridan, thank you so much for being on Cognitive Liberty with us today. A very interesting conversation. I think it was well-rounded, and certainly something I think is food for thought, but most certainly it's a real meal rather than just some sort of a appetizer. This was definitely one for the books. Thank you so much for being on the show today.